Whether you support the monarchy or you don't, the passing of Queen Elizabeth II has had a profound effect on us all. The Queen ruled for 7% of our total monarchy's history, was a dedicated servant to her country, and worked every day of her life right up until her passing. When the Queen died in Balmoral, Operation Unicorn was triggered. Operation Unicorn was the preparation and movements of the Queen should she pass away in Scotland, and included her lying in state and who and what would move her. Like her father, Operation Unicorn had plans for the Queen's coffin to be moved by the royal train. However, in the 2020s, the Queen seemed to break from tradition and changed the transportation to a plane instead. One of the first and most remarkable funeral trains that ever took place in the UK was the train of the first monarch that ever travelled on it, Queen Victoria. The Queen died at Osborne House on the Isle of Wight in 1901 at the age of 81. Osborne House was a favourite destination of the Queen, and she loved the peace and quiet. Because of the number of royals that had been at the Queen's bedside and that they were grieving, as a mark of respect, the authorities decided that no photographers would be allowed near the line and that local railwaymen and plate layers would line the route to ensure privacy. Due to the sheer number of people that were protecting the train, only 3 photos snuck through the blockade, with 2 having never been shown to the public. The Queen's coffin was carried on board her private yacht, and a massive flotilla of warships with a gun salute bore the Queen to Gosport, where the train lay ready and waiting to take the Queen to London the next morning. It was the London and Brighton and South Coast Railway's job to take the Queen home. The train was commissioned that night and brought Queen Victoria's son and heir, now King Edward VII, to his mother's coffin, and he himself personally selected the route. One decision that made the people mutter was the inclusion of the London, Brighton and South Coast Railway. It was well documented that the Queen was not a fan of that particular railway, not because they had treated her badly or had a bad experience with them. It was due, in part, to the Queen's early reign. The Queen was not a fan of the town of Brighton. She had inherited the town's royal pavilion upon her ascension, but was less than thrilled with the building. The building was her late uncle's, who was known to be over-extravagant and indulgent. As the Queen's family grew, the pavilion afforded the Queen little to no privacy. Due to her unusual upbringing, privacy was the most precious luxury the Queen had, and the Queen simply would not allow anyone or anything to take it away. Eventually, due to its unsuitability and the Queen's dislike of the place, the building was stripped of its finery and sold, and the Queen rarely set foot in the town again. The Queen was taken aboard her saloon, a Great Western Railway carriage decorated internally with purple drapes and white hangings, while the engine that was to pull the train from Fareham to Victoria, known as the Empress, a B4440 locomotive, was given her own sprucing up. She was decorated with black drapes and carried the royal seal on her smokebox. The line was closed to all traffic, and plate layers walked the line, clearing up rubbish and debris. By now, the news of the Queen's death had circled the country. People were gathering to see the royal cortege go past. A pilot engine was selected to go first to ensure the line was clear. Then the 190-ton 8-coach train followed. An A12 took the train from Gosport to Fareham, where the Empress was waiting. The King, upon his entrance to Fareham, had decided to go on ahead of the funeral train in order to meet them at Victoria Station. The train itself left Gosport delayed, thanks to a brake test. Although the late Queen was considered to be the pioneer in railway travel, she hated any form of speed. It was common for engines to reach speeds of up to 70 to 80 miles an hour. However, the Queen considered such excessive speed bad for her delicate feminine constitution. As such, her trains were limited to only 30 miles per hour, and if the Queen felt that they were going too fast, she had a call button made in her saloon, giving her a direct link to the driver. For the new king, however, punctuality was paramount. The driver and the fireman knew this, and they also knew that they probably would never work on such a train again if their precious cargo was late. So, in a move that would have made Joe Duddington himself proud, they gunned it. People lineside, expecting to see a slow-moving procession at the Queen's preferred speed, were horrified to see the funeral train hurtling along the line at nearly 90 miles an hour. In the words of the Queen herself, she certainly would not have been amused. The plan, however, worked better than expected, and the train arrived at Victoria 2 minutes early, with the coffin no worse for her ordeal. And the people aboard were very impressed at the small engine's speed and determination. As the Queen left the safety of the Empress, she was placed on a gun carriage and taken to Paddington Station, where the last stage of her journey would begin. The King had erected platforms for the elite and gentry to sit upon while they watched the Queen enter the station, and the station had been adorned in her favourite colours of purple, red and white drapes. In a touching nod, the train prepared for her was her very own for her Jubilee. Several of her Great Western Saloon cars were assembled. The engine was named Royal Sovereign, was covered with more purple and white, and a wreath of flowers was on the smokebox. The 440, also named Atbara, had pulled the royal train before on the Great Western, and with the King and the German Emperor watching, and to the tune of the funeral march, the Queen was moved to the carriages, and the train was readied. With a final nod, the train was pulled out of the station with a guard line route to Windsor. Things didn't go well upon the Queen's arrival. The train was late, and the horses that were chosen to haul the gun carriage were restless. The cold, crisp air did not do much for their horses' temperament, and many of them spooked. The horses were removed, and the Navy stripped the communication cords off the coaches and attached them to the gun carriage. The Navy then took the place of the horses and hauled the Queen through the city. The tradition of the Navy hauling the gun carriage in state funerals has now become a time-honoured tradition, as was the royal train if the monarch died. The train, like many funeral trains, allowed for the general public to pay their respects at the line side. So why did our present Queen decide to break tradition, especially if the Queen passed in Balmoral? Well, the answer is quite complex, and we may never really know, but it is easy to surmise. The cost of a royal train, as mentioned earlier in the year, can cost hundreds of thousands of pounds at a time. In a time where counting the pennies is more paramount than ever, and coming out of a pandemic, the Queen may have been advised that this is not a cost-effective or an appropriate cost that the public had to bear, considering that a state funeral is paid for by the state, aka the taxpayer. The twin engines dedicated to running the train have to also be available at the time, as they regularly do freight work, and the carriages would need to be adapted to take the Queen's coffin due to its excessive weight. Another factor the Queen may have had to take into consideration is security and safety. Seeing a steam engine on the main line, especially one like Flying Scotsman, is a rail enthusiast's dream, with many people stopping their cars and taking photos. Some people, though, take it to the extreme and will willfully trespass on the line to set up equipment in order to get the perfect photo. Some steam engines were even banned on certain stretches on the line due to trespassing, causing the line major delays. The Queen would have known that even with the best will in the world, that people would line the line side, and it would only take one person to break that cordon and stop the train, or worse. It was just too much of an ask for Network Rail to line the entire route. She knew that even though she loved her railway, Operation Unicorn was simply not feasible with a train. The railway, though, did offer its services to help with the funeral arrangements. The sheer number of people going to London meant that old decommissioned intercity NK2 rolling stock was brought in to help move the crowds. The first class coaches cost the same as the standard class and allowed for people to travel in luxury, and extra trains were laid on to cope with the influx of people. 4 out of 5 people in the UK have grown up knowing no other monarch, so the traditions and the changes and the procedures, while centuries old, have rarely been seen by people alive today. We are all going to need to adapt to a new monarch, a new king, and a new regime. The new king, Charles III, is already creating waves and shaking up the monarchy and tailoring it to his style, with many of the changes being welcomed among the public. King Charles has had a fantastic mentor and teacher, and while we do welcome the new king, and long may he reign, we can't forget the much adored and loved Queen Elizabeth II, or as many are now calling her, Elizabeth the Great.